We're live.
All right,
Good
Joshua.
evening, everyone. Tonight's episode of the Man Cave Hour. I'm one of your hosts, Mr. Joshua Cotton, along with Mr. Johnny B. Gilleylen Sr. Tonight's guests, we have special guest Senator Hillman Frazier from the 27th District, Mississippi State Senate. The illustrious Attorney Terry Davis, former USAF Colonel Judge Advocate General's Corps, Inspector General Lanham, Maryland, Attorney David Linzey, Assistant District Attorney of Hinds County, Mississippi. Dr. Quentin Holmes, Associate Professor and Program Director of the Ph.D. in Public Administration at Grambling State University, Grambling, Louisiana. And a little bit later, we'll have Mr. Charles Wells, owner of the strategic consulting firm of Jackson, Mississippi. And tonight's topic, states are returning or hoarding federal anti-poverty program funding. They are refusing to feed hungry children. All right, Johnny, go ahead and take it away.
All right, well, let me introduce the topic tonight and provide you the scenario. Is that there are 14 states that have opted out of participating in the federal government's EBT summer program this summer. Those states are Alabama, Alaska, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Mississippi, Louisiana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Vermont, and Wyoming. 9 of the states opting not to participate fall into the top half of states with the highest poverty levels in the nation. Most notable among them are the number of states that rank in the top 10%. Louisiana ranked number 1, Mississippi ranked number 2, Alabama ranked number 8, and 10th, not far behind them, is Texas at 11, with over 4.1 million citizens before the federal poverty line, followed by Georgia at 13th with 1.5 million below the poverty line. When we look at this program, the program would provide families with children who receive free or reduced lunches at school through electronic EBT transfer cards that could be used to purchase groceries during the summer. Families of each eligible child would receive $40 per month up to $120. 21 million children were expected to have benefited from the program. The program requires that states cover half of the administrative costs. The reason for these states not to participate has been varying. The governor of Mississippi opted out of the federal food summer program because he opposed welfare expansion. According to Mississippi Today, other state officials claim a lack of resources to administer the program. Oklahoma's governor stated that he doesn't want to see a single child in his state go hungry and that he'll be working to accomplish that. But large, duplicated federal programs do not accomplish that goal. End quote. Others state that they cause more bureaucracy for families to wade through. Some of these states have created a deprivation index, a requirement that assesses the extent to which children have been deprived of financial support from one or both parents. Yes, there are other summer food programs, such as the summer food service program, that's still being administered in the states, providing free sites where children can eat. Several of these states have a history of returning anti-poverty funds left unspent or hoarding them. Some even repurpose the funding, often spending the funds in much more affluent communities and neighborhoods. In 2022, ProPublica reported $5.2 billion were returned despite increasing levels of poverty in the U.S. These programs include Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF. One of the reasons that the money is not being spent is the difficulty that the program's administration have created for applicants applying for the program. Its rejection rate as high as 90%. Some families don't believe the benefit to be worth the trouble that they have and applying. This situation has also been the case in Mississippi. TANF in Mississippi is still reeling from the scandal of anti-poverty funds being misspent, over $21 million, with an application rejection rate of over 90%. Multiple layers of the state government has been implicated, including a former governor. States are permitted to use their discretion to use the funds as long as they address basic needs of those living at or below the federal poverty line. The funds could be spent or utilized for gas, electricity, food, diapers, so on. The Economic Policy Institute have just published an article noting that state and local governments have not yet spent half of the American Rescue Plan funds, as time is running out to use those funds. And 2024 is the last opportunity to utilize them. The American Rescue Plan allotted $350 billion to state and local governments. While governments do not need to spend the funds until 2026, those funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024. The ARP also provided an additional $122 billion to school districts and state education authorities. That money must be obligated by September 30, 2024, but must be spent by January 28, 2025. The latest state and local fiscal recovery fund spending data ending June 2023 shows that roughly half of the fiscal recovery funds have yet to be spent. The amount is even higher for local governments, with more than 56% of the funds unspent. So what that does is lead us into our questions tonight. And let me point out that we have a subject matter expert, outstanding senator from the state of Mississippi, long-term senator, Senator Hillman Frazier. And so what I'd like to do is introduce the first question tonight for discussion. Is the conservative dogma of returning, repurposing, or hoarding federal anti-funds by states hurtful, or is it cruel? And so, Senator Frazier, if you could start, and I do appreciate you being here, and our discussions have been so helpful for me, and I've been looking forward to the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me out this evening. We're in the midst of our session, and we're dealing with some of those issues right now. You asked the question whether or not that the actions taken so far harmful or hurtful. They've been dumb. And I'll tell you why. We're looking at the money that the governor refusing to spend on child feeding programs, school feeding programs. If you look at what's going on, we have a high poverty rate in the state of Mississippi. And also, our economy depends so much on agriculture. A lot of the food that will be bought to furnish these programs are coming from farmers in Mississippi. By turning down the program, we're also telling the farmers in Mississippi we don't want to help you during this time of crisis. We have a history of turning down the money that's going to help poor folks. Look at the Head Start program, how the state resisted that for many, many years. Look at different anti-poverty programs, how the state of Mississippi resisted that over the years. But if you look at how the money is being spent, it's spent in neighborhoods, in employing people. It's turning over several times, and it's going to help expand the low income in those areas. But in terms of sending back these dollars that's going to feed school children, that is cruel and it's dumb, because it's not only hurting the school children, it's also hurting the farmers of the state of Mississippi that we take so much pride in. The farmers always get different programs to assist them along the way. And they're always asking for additional help because they say that farming is a business and big gambling in many instances. But by accepting the money, we also help the children and the families who need it so desperately. We also help the bottom line of the farmers who will be supplying the food to this children in our own state and also across the region.
John, you're on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. Senator Frazier. Quentin, Dr. Holmes, could you comment on that as well?
Yes, and good evening to everyone again on this panel. I just look forward to hearing everyone's comments, and Senator Frazier, definitely enjoyed hearing your comments as well. As you were speaking, one of the thoughts that I went through, and when I read this question, is that our politics in this type of issue, returning funds, have become either based on cultural differences or just political differences. When we're asking, is it harmful or cruel to states? And I think that is both harmful and cruel, because as a public administrator, obviously my focus will be on looking at policies and are they effective? And certainly this is a program that has been effective to help improve communities in a number of areas. But where you get to, I think, personal differences is because, and culture differences and political differences, is it not necessarily the right thing to do, but what are my beliefs, right, wrong, and indifferent? We're not looking at does the program work. It's just what do I believe? And you're not representing the people that you were sworn, took an oath to serve. It's just trying to stay within a certain political group or culture group. And the last comment is the package that everyone want to put on. Why do we need to make these type of cuts? Why do we need to have these type of political beliefs? Is that they want to attribute it to there's fraud in the system. And so often I find myself discussing with people is that in any program, in a policy, you're going to have a tangent of fraud, but that's the less than 10% of it. So you're going to eliminate an entire program under the umbrella. You're trying to reduce fraud as opposed to strengthening your fraud investigators and hold those people accountable and continue a very good program. So yes, I think you used the correct word when you said conservative dogma, because that's what I think that it is from the things that I read, discussions that I hear. It's certainly not trying to put a best policy or continue a best policy, a best program moving forward. Thank you.
Terry, could you speak on that as well, please?
Yes, and to be frankly honest, I'd like to echo some of the comments that Senator Frazier announced, particularly when he mentioned the fact that a lot of the agricultural folks also depend upon the fact that they can participate in those kinds of programs. But to answer the questions, we're dealing with what we call an issue of fiscal law, and it hurts because money unspent normally is lost. If money has been appropriated for a particular purpose and you do not use that money for that purpose for which it was appropriated, under the fiscal law program, you have a very great chance of not getting that money appropriated in future years, because you basically demonstrated that there is no need for those funds. So it hurts necessarily. And again, echoing from the comments from Senator Frazier, it's also cruel, because you're supposed to be trying to support people, and you've got money that necessarily has been appropriated for the benefit of children. And I think I read somewhere that there are 324,000 children in the state of Mississippi that are basically considered insecure as far as food is concerned. And so to not expend those funds for that purpose is cruel, particularly if the people who are basically trying, the people who are in charge of governance is making the decision that they're not going to expend those funds when those funds have clearly been made available for that purpose. And I'd also like to say that, decisions with regard to EBT and any of the other programs basically has to be viewed in the context that we're no longer looking at politics, all politics being local. many of the political decisions that are being made now are geared toward a national agenda or a national trend. And nobody wants to buck necessarily that national trend, particularly the conservative politicians that are in charge of most of the southern states where you have Republican governors. That too equates to a cruel reality, because they're basically dancing to the tune of a national attention, whereas they've got people necessarily that are being hurt by their actions.
So I want to come back to Senator Frazier one more time. Senator, you and I, we've had some discussion several months ago about spending, funding, and how those funds are being spent. And what I want for you to, if you don't mind, explaining to us that it's not always the conservatives that's not spending the money, because a lot of that funding make it to the local level, and we just fail to apply. And so part of the blame, if you would, could you expound on that conversation that I think we began that conversation back in May, and war ceremony.
Right. You're making a very good point. Our state has received billions of dollars to different programs. Let's look at the opera funds, for instance. We received $1.9 billion of opera funds for infrastructure projects, and we're making the money available to local governments to address some of the needs they have on the local level. We appropriate that money to a lot of the local areas and some state agencies, but under the opera regulations, the money has to be obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026. Now, if you don't have a shovel-ready project in the pipeline, you can't spend that money, and it has to come back. So we said it in a capital budget right this week, determining how we're going to spend the money that was not spent on the local level. We appropriated money to different agencies, different local entities, but they didn't spend the money. So if they don't spend it goes back to Washington. So we're trying to figure out how we can reallocate that to different other agencies, different other local governments, because we have many needs. During the hearing, in terms of spending the money, we only had $1.9 billion, but we had $8 billion in requests. Folks had a wish list, but they had no plans to spend the money. They had ideas, but no plans that we could go forward with. So the plans have to be ready because we have a very short timeline in which to spend that money. And so that's part of the problem we're facing in terms of the money that we're spending. A lot of the money is not being turned over, sent back by conservatives, so to say. Some of the money is being spent by liberals who have not had a plan, have not presented a plan for us for those funds. So that's why we have to assist them along the way. Sometimes a lot of officials just getting into the loop in terms of how to govern. So a lot of them didn't have the training necessary to assist them in terms of applying for these funds, and also having a plan in place to implement different programs. So we're trying to assist them by encouraging, let's say, the municipal association, the board of supervisors association, to assist those local entities in terms of how to acquire that money and how to spend it in a timely manner. Because if we don't spend it, it goes back to Washington. And this is the last state that can afford to send any money back to Washington, because we have many needs in the state infrastructure and also in many different areas.
So David, we see, like the senator says, is that there's federal money being spent, that's being dispersed, and there's federal money that's being spent in all these states, blue states and conservative states. In most cases, more federal money comes into the states with high poverty than the taxes that's collected by those states. So my question is not wanting my state, let me put this in quotes, open quote, wanting my state to become a welfare state, close quote. Is that hypocritical?
Yes, it is hypocritical. And I think it goes back to what some of the previous speakers talked about as far as a political national agenda and not wanting to, I guess, buck the trend. I think just the reality of the system that we have, the politics that we have, if you buck the trend, it may hurt your political future when you want to go forward. So I believe that a lot of what ends up happening is people don't want to step out, and they choose their political agenda basically over the needs of the people, which that's not supposed to happen. And I think one of the things that you end up seeing is that it may also be a bit of a strategy, because one of the things you end up seeing is that a lot of times those states that have the higher taxes, that they end up funding the states that actually collect lower taxes. And those states that collect lower taxes, of course, the political agenda suggests that if those who pay the most taxes, which of course would be theoretically the people who have the most money, pay fewer taxes, then they're going to continue to hype those politicians who help fulfill their needs, which means those politicians in turn will have a better opportunity of getting more funding at their next election and more support. So it's kind of I guess, a nasty trend.
Charles, would you comment, please? Charles, you're muted.
The questions that we've been answering thus far, when I look at it, I view this as being a strategy to reduce the number of people that vote. There have been studies done since the 1960s that say that there's a causal relationship between poverty and voting, not just a correlation. So that information has been out there for a long time that says that where there's poverty, in most cases, the percentage of people that vote that is lower. It also should show that in states where there were policies that encourage voting, there was also there was not a big poverty gap in the masses, but again, so what I'm getting at is that the policies, the individual policies that we see, where states are sending back dollars that could be used to help the poor, that this is a form of voter suppression in disguise. And when they send the money back, it does hurt. You have states like Mississippi that's a welfare state, but don't want to be called a welfare state. But it's, again, in summary, this is a strategy that's used for voter suppression through the way of poverty. Like I was listening earlier this morning, they were talking about Medicaid expansion. And even in Mississippi was saying that a lot of people that are on Medicaid don't even vote. But I think that maybe the bill that's coming through right now may tie voter registration with being able to qualify for Medicaid expansion dollars. But John, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question per se, but for me, all of these things that we're talking about, it's an overall strategy across the country it's designed to suppress voting by given that studies have been done since 1960 that shows that there's a causal relationship between poverty and voting. So where there's more poverty, there's a less percentage of people that vote. So I'm sorry I didn't answer your question directly, but I just see that this is an overall strategy that's been used across the entire country.
We keep hearing this term, welfare state. And it's not real clear to me sometimes that when we define that concept, that we really, or when it's perceived as negative. It's perceived as negative, but I wonder, I wonder if our state, given how rural we are, if we could survive, or our state could maintain its current status, if we didn't have that imbalance between the dollars that we pay in taxes and the amount of federal dollars that we bring back. So, Quentin, could you comment on that for me, please?
Sure. And maybe you have osmosis or something today because you actually just read notes that I've written down regarding the welfare states. And my comment is this, I put in my notes just a minute ago that it's the messaging of social programs. And I think the messaging has been done such that when we use the term welfare, that's it's a negative stigma to it. And whether you're a Republican governor or Democratic governor, you don't want your state or your city to be called "quote unquote" welfare. And the stigma has been placed on the fact of welfare equals Black and brown people, communities of color. Even though when we look at the the numbers, not on a per capita but just individual, that's not the case. So my comments were just that is that the messaging has been done such that it's the negative perception of being a welfare state. It's the lack of training, as the senator just mentioned, in terms of even for liberal-minded folks to know how to access the money, how to complete the grants, or know where to go to get grants completed to secure the funds. They have good plans, but doing that back-end work takes a lot. So maybe there needs to be some training there. And to the point that was made about poverty equal less voting, I think that's clear without even looking at a poll. You tend to see communities that are below the poverty level take less interest in voting. And that's something else that goes with the stigma of welfare state, equal poverty, equal not voting. So why should we waste our funds in those areas? It tend to be the mindset that some conservative people will take.
Senator, this concept of a welfare state being a negative to a point to where governors actually refuse or make the decision to refuse federal funding or send that money back. You're a politician. Which is worse? Which is worse? This term welfare state or these high morbidity and mortality numbers that we see month after month, year after year? It's always the same states. Which is worse? You're a politician.
Very good point you're making there. Several good points. First of all, Mississippi is in fact a welfare state. 1/3 of our budget comes from the federal government. We have a $15 billion budget and $15 billion budget, and 1/3 of those dollars come from the federal government. And if you remove those federal dollars, what we have in Mississippi, we would have more dirt roads, critically inferior health care in the state. It's going to impact education in the state. When I was first elected, for every dollar we sent to Washington, we received $3 plus back in federal taxes. So that money is being spent in Mississippi for roads and healthcare and different things. But without those federal dollars, we'll be forced to make different cuts, severe cuts in some of the services we now enjoy. All alternative raise additional revenue, and so they don't have the appetite to do that. But we are a welfare state, and we have been accepting federal dollars for different programs for many, many years, and that's going to continue. We're going to continue to be a welfare state because we don't have the population and the industry to grow our economy to offset the loss of federal dollars that we possibly can. And every time I hear our state leaders talking about passing a Balanced Budget Act in Washington. Once they do that, it's going to hurt states like Mississippi because it's going to equalize the money going to those states. As opposed to receiving $3 back from the feds under the balanced budget, we might receive $1 for $1 back. So that's going to severely impact our state of Mississippi. But we're a welfare state, and we have been accepting federal dollars to help in different areas of the state. A lot of them don't see those as poverty areas like highways and healthcare and transportation and the likes. But they affect people, and we remove those dollars, we're going to be in serious trouble in Mississippi because we can't balance our budget without those federal funds because we don't have enough state dollars, state taxes, and also gaming revenues to offset any loss of revenue we might experience from the federal government. So yes, we're a welfare state, and we have to own up to it, and we have to do the best we can in terms of attracting additional dollars to the state.
John, there's something I'd like to say on this.
Yeah.
Joshua, you were the person that I was going to call next. So, but I want you to put it. Can you do it in this context for me, as you respond? Could you respond to it? Is this negative perception just the idea of who these dollars serve? Because we see that these dollars are coming to the state. We see that these dollars are being spent. A lot of the people that benefit from the dollars coming into federal dollars coming in state don't necessarily live in the poorest communities. So could you speak for that when you add your comment to that, please?
Oh, yeah. I was definitely going to cover that already. The conservatives have done a really good job over the past, 50 to close to 100 years of using propaganda to reform the concept of welfare. It's inherently the duty of not only the state, but any state. And when I say state, I mean organized political body. I mean nations. I mean individual principalities. Every single concept of government's primary job is to protect the livelihood, thereby the welfare of the people, and then secure it. This is something which has been argued by every political philosopher, every philosopher that's even looked at states. When you look at Rousseau, when you look at Thomas Hobbes, it always comes down to, can they protect the people? Can they ensure the welfare of the people? It's Article 1, I want to say Section 8 of our own Constitution that dictates that the very purpose of this government, the reason why they raise taxes, the reason why they exist at all is to protect the welfare of the people. They've turned welfare from it being well-being to it being some sense of overwhelming charity and some sense of depravity based on poor people of color basically just being too lazy to get a job. And it's not any of that. How can a state not protect things like water? Okay, how do you tell somebody to go out there? Okay, well, it's not the government's job to make sure you got clean water. Go out there and pull that doo-doo out the water yourself, because that's what you've got to do as a person to live. When you already have clean water, you don't have that problem. Okay, when you're looking at these things, conservatives have built this ideology that it's weakness to have to be provided by the government for these different objects or these certain things, and it's all things they already have because they already have a built-up system already provided by the government for the past 200 years. There's no need for them to worry about these certain issues of welfare because it's already covered. And now they don't want to put, and their constituents don't want to spend that money on something that they think other people were too weak to do, which they already have. But the second that you put those back in those situations where they're endangered by it, they start screaming, where is the government? Where were they for this? Every time there's a hurricane, every time there's a tornado in one of those affluent areas, you hear them asking for welfare. They say it's the job of the state to ensure the welfare up until it comes to the everyday life of people who don't have as much. And the Republicans have built this entire system on this. They have convinced their base that to need help or that to provide help by the state is weakness. They have this weird version of John Wayne that they all pretend to be, where they want to show that they're a strong man. So Tate Reeves, who ends up looking like the Riddler in the new Batman movie, now proceeds as I'm strong because I'm able to adapt and have everything I need, whereas these poor people can't. And they can't must be because, well, look what color most of them are. So it's these tinges of white supremacy argued with this concept of strongman ideology, which is reminiscent of really Nazi ideology. It's like the worst version of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I mean, it's like an insane version of, I can't even remember his name, that wrote that philosophy. But they're just been pushing this so long that this is strong, that this is what a real man does. This is what a real American does. This is what is provided by those who are righteous by God. And that's why they have, and those that don't have must not be protected by God. They must be heathens. And it all comes down to that same concept that they pushed for so many years of that white Anglo-Saxon Christian, which is the ideal of what they feel is America. Everything outside of that sucks because it's not that, and God doesn't love it. So if we don't support them, well, if we don't give out that support, then, basically what ends up happening is they get what they deserve. And that's been their motto. That's why they can turn away food for children. That's why they can close schools that provide for people that, haven't ever had anything, because they already have. You can look at those affluent areas and see that they have more money in some of those high schools than entire districts throughout the rest of this state. You can go and see these rich farmers who are talking about, oh, we're getting this government aid because, hey, we're working hard and all the rest of this stuff, when they're multi-million-dollar farms and they're taking all the funds from those other small farms in rural areas of Mississippi where they don't have, even the basic necessities. It's this insane balance of thinking that you deserve everything you have and no one else deserves to have even a part of what you do.
Terry.
Dr. J, if I can highlight one point that I just made and with the comments that were just made as well.
Sure.
And I agree with everything Joshua said. Certainly, I think when the senator brought out and put a welfare state and that Mississippi is in other states, I think all of us on this call understand what's meant by that welfare state. And it's the point I wanted to highlight with my comments. What I think Joshua is saying is that term welfare has been changed to the average person as minority people of color receiving funds and no one else. If we were to take a poll or look at a poll, most would not attribute the word welfare to roads or schools or infrastructure. So my argument was, if we just, as we just mentioned, conservatives have done a fantastic job of changing the meaning of that word. But if we can reverse that trend and start calling it public services, where it includes everything, and then you won't have the stigma. But that was just a highlight to me of when we say we're a welfare state, it's received by the masses as poor people, black people, people of color getting government funds. They're not looking at that other stuff. Thank you.
Terry.
This has been a very, very good discussion. Thank you, Joshua, because I think you really encapsulated pretty much. I don't know that there could be a better answer, but what I would just like to say is that the state of Mississippi is a part of the United States of America. We send representatives from the state of Mississippi to Washington to sit down at the table and to decide just how the budget of the United States of America is going to be divvied out. And certainly we deserve to have our portion. And to be frankly honest, like the senator said, we don't necessarily have the kind of tax dollars that we can generate locally. And so therefore we may very well get, as he said, 1/3 of our budget from the federal government. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why we are part of this union. And the fact that you can call it welfare, every state in some measure is going to get some dollars from the federal government. And I don't think they're going to call it welfare. And one of the things, too, that I'd like to point out is that, and particularly what I'm not so sure who was talking about, but we're talking about a situation of power. Power is a seat at the table and numerical superiority. When you're trying to reduce, people's ability to vote on particular issues, you're trying to reduce that table. You're trying to make sure that you've got the numbers necessarily to do what you want to do. And if you've got the numbers, then you've got the power to basically say or characterize welfare as being something negative, as opposed to being generally what the whole United States of America or being a part of the union is all about. And so I just got to say that good discussions. I'm just happy to be able to contribute some.
So, David, let me ask. I want to come back to the senator in a little bit, but David, let me ask you this question. And I know that you've been involved in politics some as well. And when we look at, and I've heard this um, situation where for many children, the only meal that they get in a day is the meal that they get at school. And so when we look at the different types of programs, and we know that there's the Hunger Free Act that feeds the kids at school. But is there a difference between having sites where children without cars drive or go to eat and that money being available on an EBT card?
Sick. Could you repeat that question? Or
When we children, when we look at feeding the children, there is data, fact. It's established that for many children, the only meal that they get in a day is at school. At the end of the week, when they're Saturday and Sunday, some of them don't eat or have to eat very little. So when we look at the summer program that was refused, the money that was refused by our governor, to where that money could have been placed on an EBT card, is that significantly different of the EBT card than driving to a site to be fed?
yes, one of the issues, and I think in some article I read, one of the issues becomes if you have to physically be on site, that means that you're probably going to be less likely to benefit from those benefit from the advantage of the offering. If it's on an EBT card, then you can go to your local, grocery store. Someone in your family can actually help out to go to the store to buy the necessities and the things that qualify under EBT. It makes a huge difference. Like you said, some people only have that opportunity once a day or for that particular time. um, Ironically, when we talk about that particular situation, there was a situation a few years ago on the NCAA tournament, and I believe it was a player from Connecticut. He was, had humble background. They won a national title, and I think he was a point guard. And when they interviewed that player, he basically said during the weekends, the cafeteria during the week, we can eat the 3 square meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Then on weekends, they close the
Yeah.
cafeteria early. When they close the cafeteria early, then I'm hungry on the weekends. And this is a person who just won the national title and is on millions in front of millions of people. And based on that, I think that next week the NCAA changed all their policies about feeding because I think they got embarrassed by the fact that you have this person and all this money's being spent, and yet you still have people who are hungry. And I think more attention needs to be put on those types of situations because right now it is hidden based on the code word welfare. That's a negative, and when it's all said and done, what ends up happening is you just end up creating a permanent underclass, and that's advantage to those who are already in power.
So, Charles, if you don't mind, when we in dealing with the morbidities and mortality issues that we see in these states with very high poverty numbers, and we see the same people going back into power, or people that oppose or have issues with doing the kinds of things that get these things changed. So my question is, why do we continue to send and vote for and put into power these same people?
I think that one thing is that people, to a great extent, are uneducated, and you have the way funding takes place. Schools that are not funded well, the children are not educated well. Also, as we've been talking about tonight, poverty causes fewer people to vote. So we then have a class of people. We have a group of people that are being elected, whereas in the whole masses of people that can vote do not vote. So we have a small percentage of people electing the people that get back into office. So then we have a situation where it looks like people are being elected and people are voting against their own interests. John, I think these people at times, a lot of them don't vote, or they're not educated to know even enough to know how to decipher what these issues are, and the relationship between policy and laws that impact them every day. So,
You know, Charles, we often hear, and we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
yeah,
And when when you have to spend the day thinking about where, when, and what your next meal is going to be, it's hard for you to spend your mental capacity creating great things.
John, I was watching a show a while back. It was called Robin Hood of Locksley. And the sheriff of Nottingham made a statement. He said, and they were talking about the high taxes that were being assessed to people that live there. His statement was that if I can keep their heads buried down, if I can keep them stressed out about trying to earn dollars to pay these taxes, and in effect cause them to live in a situation of need, he said, then I can do what I want to do with them. And I do believe, John, that that's a strategy that was used then. That's a strategy that's used now to keep our eye away from seeing what the true issues are or what the true problems are. And it worked. That strategy worked then. That strategy works now. That if I'm struggling trying to decipher, and we were talking about kids that go hungry. If a parent that has a child that's going hungry, man, can you imagine what that mindset is not on voting? And as a matter of fact, they may even commit crime because there's a need for them to feed their children. So they may go out and also commit a crime. And then if they do that, then their children may see their parents doing the same thing. So then we develop a family generation of committing crime. So these things are interrelated, and I wish, and I hope as we talk about these things more and more people will see how the dots and threads, how they all tie together. And I do believe that these things are planned by the powers that be. Someone else mentioned earlier about individuals in power want to keep power. And I think those people that's in power, they understand the type of policies that they're doing. And these things are done on purpose. But they have to portray it as being something that the powers that be, that they did not understand what they were doing. But I think they know. It's an overall plan that maybe if they were not smart enough to figure it out for themselves, some think tank figured it out for them and gave them a plan to follow, and they just followed that plan. And the result is what we see today: people voting against their own interests, or we're getting people in office that's against our interests. But keep in mind that these people that got in office, they are serving somebody's interest. It may not be ours, but they're serving someone's interest.
Hey,
Senator,
Johnny, may I comment on that?
sure.
Because I think the question is, why do voters vote against their own interests? I'd like to say that basically, in my mind, there are three categories of voters. But bottom line, this is a country where voting is important. You're basically asked to vote, and you would hope that people would vote in their own best interest. But the three classes that I have is that you got the interested voters. That interested voter is going to be somebody who pretty much is going to keep up with the policies that are ongoing, or those things that's going to be made better for them by voting. They're going to vote. But then you've got the principle or the personality voters, where people are just basically voting for people because they like them, or they like that personality, or they like the charm necessarily that goes with that individual. But then the biggest class of voters are those folks who do not vote. When you do not vote, you are literally voting against your own interest. And just like Charles is saying, you basically, if you don't vote and you find yourself behind the power curve, now you're trying to find an alternate way of trying to make your life better when you could probably have done so if you had voted. And one other point, with regard to using the EBT cards, I grew up at a time when my parents actually went to the welfare store to get the commodity milk, the commodity cheese, the commodity meat, and all of that necessarily was an embarrassing situation for the parents to have to go through. And the fact that we made welfare in this country such a negative thing, even just to show up to get food was viewed as being somehow you're less than what you were supposed to be because you showed up to get food there. So to have that card in order to get food and not have to go and stand in line to get commodity meat, commodity cheese, commodity milk, and all of that, that has to be a better situation. So we've got to get out of our head necessarily that being a welfare state is somehow negative. We just need to participate. And with regard to voting, we've got to find a way to get people to vote.
May I
You
add?
know,
Sorry.
go ahead, please.
And voting is a very important thing. I would like to throw out two additional things along the same path as we talk about voting. One is that we focus on redistricting, that takes place every 10 years. We focus on how our legislature draws lines that can empower, can make a vote stronger or weaker. And then we talk about the voter registration. Then we talk about the voting, but then also we could also talk about accountable governance, which means that once we get politicians in office, we have a mechanism to hold them accountable for what they do or what they should have done. And one other crazy thought, and we talk about the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. I even think that when it comes down to politicians, that we should have a way to hold them accountable for when they make statements that's against what the facts are, since they are there to improve the welfare of the citizens that they represent.
Charles, that is well put. And let's just use the correct term for that so that we can make sure that when people hear it, they know what you're talking about. The term for that's called democracy. The fact that we should be able to hold these individuals accountable. We should be able to select representatives that represent our interests. That's called democracy. That's what we hear that this election is all about. But we're getting close to our time, and there are three questions I really want to address, and one is for our senator because he's most familiar. Senator, it has always disturbed me that I called a congressman, one of our congressmen that I knew, and I asked him to help us with a program that Mississippi was about to lose. And he said, John, let me tell you. He said, when I go to Congress and I work to get things for the people in my district and it passes, when the money makes it to the state, the governor and the legislature sends the money that I argued for to other communities other than mine. I've never totally understood how the intergovernmental system that we have allow money that comes to the state to be repurposed like that. Could you expound on that for us just a little? Senator, you're muted, and you're upside down here too. Could you help us, Joshua, with that?
Ooh, I can't adjust it from here, but it looks like you're having some kind of mic issue, Senator. No, we can't. Hit mute now and then try it. Maybe be something like that. Now speak.
Senator, I want you to answer that question for me. So if you could you go out and come back in? We'll wait for you.
Hey, John, while he's coming back in, a good example of what you're talking about, repurposing of dollars. The city of Jackson brings to the state of Mississippi roughly $800 million a year just based upon head count. But those dollars, when they come back to the state of Mississippi, they are relocated. The dollars are sent to other cities other than the city of Jackson. And that's why governors push to a great extent for block granting. It allows them to it gives them more power to decide where those dollars go. And that's something that will be a good topic for people to understand how that allocation takes place.
Senator Frazier.
We know about that TANF in Hattiesburg.
I'm back.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Senator, could you answer
Yes,
that
we can hear you.
question?
That you mentioned TANF.
Well, you just went out again.
Yes, I think he's having a connection problem. And let
Hey,
me
Johnny,
say,
Yep, we got you back.
Johnny, let me just say this. Fiscal law sets the limits or the likelihood for repurposing. And I hate to get technically by using a term like fiscal law, but that's literally the law that governs just how funds are appropriated and sent out to the various states. Limits are included in the appropriation, the legislation. Dual purpose funding may be repurposed as aligned with the appropriation. Now, grants to the state may be generally where you're going to find a lot of repurposing, because what the federal government does is it gives money to the states in block grants, and that money can be used for such things as healthcare, education, social services, infrastructure, or public safety. And just like the senator, the congressman told you, yeah, he argued for money for a particular district, but when the money comes into the state, if it comes in by way of a block grant, that means that the state can basically use it for whatever purposes the state believes needs to be used for. And of course, that goes back to the question of power. If the vote is there necessarily to spend that money in a district other than the district that you had intended it to go to, then you lose those funds.
Hey, John,
if the senator gets back, okay, what I want to do is I want to end this conversation when he gets back. And the reason that I want to end it because I want to talk about Senate Bill 2726. Senator Frazier, can you hear me? Senator Frazier, can you hear me? While he's trying to connect, Senate Bill 2726 is aimed at minimizing some of the universities in Mississippi. And we've heard that there are several targets for this bill. We've heard that it's Jackson State, Alcorn, Mississippi Valley, and Delta State.
Delta State.
I also heard that in aiming this bill, it's aimed at Mississippi University for Women, primarily Delta State, and MBSC. And if I'm correct, Senator Frazier, I think you sit on this committee, and I know
Yeah.
that some of this information on this is confidential. But if you could, best you could, within the ethical parameters of your responsibilities, could you give us some information on how where this bill is, what's the possibility of this bill passing? Any information that you could give us would be appreciated.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm glad you bring that up because we've been receiving a lot of calls about that bill. That bill was authored by Senator Polk from Hattiesburg, but a similar bill has been introduced for the past several years, targeted at some of our institutions for closure. The bill that Polk introduced does not specify any particular university. In the past, when the bills were introduced like that, they targeted specific universities. The W was targeted in the past. Valley State and Delta State were targeted in the past, but this particular bill targets no particular school. It's just saying that the College Board has to come back with a plan by 2025 to the legislature, recommending the closure of 3 institutions. And also, those institutions have to be closed by 2028. But the committee considered that bill today, as a matter of fact, and we didn't take it up because there's no appetite on the part of the legislature to close any institution. But in that bill is something that folks can't overlook. It's going to allow them to identify 3 institutions, close them, and sell the assets to a state agency or a nonprofit foundation. We know for years Ole Miss has been trying to go private because it would get them under the restrictions of the state. If that bill passes, they could identify Ole Miss, and their foundation can buy the assets of the university and come from under state control. So this is a backway approach of getting Ole Miss the thing they wanted all along in terms of becoming private, without being under state control. But the bill as presented has no chance of passing like the past bills. We did meet today in our committee, and it was not discussed. We'll meet again on Tuesday, but that bill will not be called up for consideration because there's no appetite to close any institutions. The biggest complaint we're getting right now is the naming of the W. We've seen a lot of calls about that, but that won't be considered this session either because they can't get together on a new name for the W. But in terms of the bill that Polk recommended, it did not specify which 3 institutions that would be set aside for closure. Going to leave it up to the College Board, and based on the feel of the committee today in this session, that bill will not see the light of day because there's no appetite on the part of our committee to close institutions. We're in the process of trying to enhance them at this point because we're trying to track industry. If we close institutions, it's going to send the wrong message to industry that we are closed for business. That's what we're trying to enhance what we have on the books right now.
And that
Well,
comes
Senator,
right off the
thank
heels
you.
of an article basically arguing that, what was it, Mississippi State was appropriated $250 million that was supposed to go to Alcorn over the years?
For the agriculture, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those land credit institutions have been underfunded around the country for several years, and we're trying to make sure that we address some of those inequities. As you know, Alcorn, Valley, and Jackson did receive $500 million from the state as a result of the RSKs. We spent the money over a 17-year period of time. We are trying to maintain those funding levels in addition to giving them additional funding levels to improve and enhance some of the programs they have already. But like I said, the land grant institutions around the country, the black ones, have been underfunded for several years. And we're trying to figure out a way to recapture that money so they can reinvest those monies back into Alcorn in Mississippi and also some of the land grant colleges around the country.
Yeah, the land grant. I'm sorry.
Our time is up, but I do want to say this, Senator Frazier. Thank you so very much for sure. You enriched our conversation and discussion tonight, and we look forward to have an opportunity for you to come back and visit with us and impart on us the kind of knowledge that you're privy to. And as always, I want to thank our panel for being here. I thought the conversation tonight was very rich and a very informing conversation, not just for us, but for our community as well. So this is one show for sure that we need to make sure that our people see and hear. So I want to thank you guys. Until the next time, our next broadcast is going to be in March. And the topic that we'd like to discuss is a topic that Joshua brought to us earlier this week, or last week, Joshua, is the importance of history and the importance of Black history. Black History Month will be over, but that's a discussion that needs to be had, because Black history, as being taught in our schools and universities around the country, are now being threatened. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your participation and see you next time. Thank you so much, Senator Frazier.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Y'all have a
Thank
good
you.
time.
Night, everyone.
Thank
night.
you.